Hey everyone, it's Heather Nichols, and today I am going to play with the Mini Media Mat by Waffle Flower. Today was all about play, and I did some experimenting with smooshing and the emboss resist technique. So let me show you what I did, and I'm pretty excited about my results. Take a look at the main supplies that I used to create the projects that I'm sharing with you today. The main star of the show is, of course, that Mini Multimedia Mat by Waffle Flower. I used liquid watercolor, and then I also needed to add water to the liquid watercolor, so I have my dropper bottle and my spritzing bottle so that I can add water as I'm doing my techniques. I'm using the Make a Splash background stamp for my project. I'll be embossing this with clear embossing powder, so I have my VersaMark ink, my powder tool, and my clear embossing powder. To clean up the multimedia mat, I have the Stamper's Spritz. I'll use the cleaning cloth as well. For the sentiments on my project, I'm using the Simple Strips Friendship stamp, along with the coordinating Simple Strips die and new Simple Strips backer die. I'll use the foam sticky strips to attach those to my projects. I'm using Sugar Cube ink. I'm using the Bits and Pieces Drip Drops embellishments, and I've got the Embelly Jelly there, and I'll use Multimedia Mat to attach those to my project. Alright, so let's take a look at this Mini Multimedia Mat. It is a silicone mat, and it has a backing that makes it non-slip on your surfaces and has a nice depressed area in the middle of it so that you can use your media things, like I'm going to use liquid watercolor for this project, and it will stay in one place and not go all over your workspace. Okay, let me explain what I was trying to do, and I think it turned out pretty cool. What I did was basically the smooshing technique. If you haven't done the smooshing technique before, you put ink, or in this case I'm using liquid watercolor, down onto a surface, and you're going to press your paper into the drops of color and create kind of a multicolored effect on your paper. For today's project, I thought what I wanted to try was smooshing in a lighter tone of colors first, and then I would emboss a background stamp or some sort of design, and that's what I'm doing with the Make a Splash background, over the top of the lighter smooshing on the paper, and then I would emboss that design, and then I would smoosh into darker colors so that the lighter colors would show through on the clear embossing and the darker colors would fill in those spaces that were not embossed. I used watercolor cardstock and did my technique on the smooth side of the cardstock, and that's because when you're stamping on the watercolor cardstock, the smooth side is going to give you better results than the side with all of the texture. Okay, so I've got all of my lighter colors smooshed onto this piece of watercolor cardstock, and I've set up my Misty with the Make a Splash background, and I'm setting that piece of smooshed cardstock into the Misty. I'm going to use my powder tool so that I can get rid of any static. I'll ink up the Make a Splash stamp with VersaMark ink and then close the lid of the Misty to stamp that on the watercolor cardstock. Now, watercolor cardstock will suck in the ink a lot more than just standard cardstock, and so you may need to stamp your image more than once so that you get a really good impression with the VersaMark ink. Once the image is stamped, I'll add clear embossing powder to it. I'll tap off the extra and heat the embossing powder and melt it until it is shiny. Now that I have my first layer of smooshing done and the embossing over the top with the clear embossing powder, I'm adding color to the Mini Multimedia Mat again. This time I'm not going to add a lot of water to lighten the color. I'm going to use them at a more saturated tone. I will spray them with a little bit of water just to get the color moving on the media mat. I'll press the embossed cardstock into the liquid watercolor on the mat. Wherever the image is embossed, it will resist the liquid watercolor, and you'll be able to see the smooshing that's trapped underneath that embossing. I'm going to try this again in a few other colors, so I'm going to do a quick cleanup. I'll use paper towel to get the majority of the media off the mat, and then I'll use the Stamper's Spritz, spray a few spritzes right on the mat, and use the cleaning cloth to wipe it clean. It really cleans it up really well, and as long as you are cleaning things up right away after you use them, you're going to have a better chance of not having staining on your mat. Here's a look at a few other color combinations. Now Now that I've created the 3 different backgrounds, I'm ready to put these cards together. Sentiments on my projects are stamped with the Simple Strips Friendship stamp, and I stamped the sentiments with Sugar Cube ink on Toffee cardstock and die cut them out with the coordinating Simple Strips die. I also added a backer to each of the strips that I die cut from vellum using the Simple Strips backer die. I added each of my backgrounds to a card base that matched the colors in the design. I have a Jelly Donut card base, a Cookie Monster card base, and a Guava card base. The Simple Strips sentiments are added to each card using the foam sticky strips, and then I added the bits and pieces drip drops around the sentiments using the multimedia matte adhesive. I hope you enjoyed the results of my play using the mini media mat from Waffle Flower and playing with the smooshing and emboss resist technique. You can find all the supplies to create this project at the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody, and I'll see you next time.